judge tried to frame a simple maid, not realizing her daughter was a legal prodigy. It all began in a grand marble mansion where a powerful judge lived, known throughout the city for his arrogance and authority. Every morning, a humble maid would enter quietly, sweeping the polished floors, dusting the framed awards, and ensuring the judge's world remained spotless. She never spoke much, always bowing her head when passing him in the hall. Yet the judge often regarded her with disdain, seeing her not as a human being but as someone beneath his world of law and order. One fateful afternoon, his prized golden watch disappeared from his office desk. Without any real proof, his eyes turned to the maid. Rage overtook his reason. He accused her of stealing, shouting that she had betrayed his trust. The maid trembled, her hands shaking as she tried to explain she hadn't even entered his office that day. But the judge's pride blinded him. He called security, demanded she be taken away, and swore to ruin her life for what he called a betrayal of service. The maid sat in the corner of the security office, tears streaming down her face, whispering prayers under her breath. All she ever wanted was to earn an honest living for her daughter, who had just graduated from law school, the first in their family to ever hold a degree. When her daughter received the news, she was silent at first, then her expression hardened. She knew her mother's gentle heart would never steal, and if the law was being used to destroy her, she would use the same law to save her. That night, she gathered every document, every file she could access, and began piecing together a plan. She reviewed the judge's office layout, requested CCTV footage through legal channels, and even tracked down the assistant who worked closely with the judge. Every step revealed something darker. The judge wasn't just wrong, he was hiding something. By dawn, the young lawyer had everything she needed. The next morning, she walked into the courthouse, her posture calm but her eyes fierce. The judge was there, waiting to humiliate her mother publicly, surrounded by officers and reporters he'd invited to witness the punishment. But as the maid's daughter entered, the atmosphere shifted. Her presence was quiet but commanding. When the hearing began, she requested to represent her mother. The judge sneered, mocking her courage, but she stood firm. With steady confidence, she presented the CCTV footage, revealing the truth everyone had missed. The judge's own assistant sneaking into his office and pocketing the missing watch. The crowd gasped, whispers rippling through the courtroom. The judge's arrogance began to fade, replaced by fear, but she didn't stop there. She played an audio clip, one her mother had unknowingly recorded while cleaning. The judge's voice echoed through the speakers, ordering his assistant to frame the maid to cover his own theft scandal. Silence fell. The once mighty judge sat frozen, humiliated before the world. The maid's daughter had turned the tables, proving not only her mother's innocence but also exposing corruption from within. The maid wept with pride, realizing that the daughter she raised through struggle had now become the force that restored their honor. The next morning, the maid's daughter walked into the courthouse with a quiet determination that made even the guards pause. She wore a simple gray suit, her documents neatly organized in her arms, and though her appearance was humble, her eyes burned with focus. The judge sat at the bench with an air of arrogance, surrounded by colleagues and reporters he had invited to witness what he believed would be the humiliation of a poor maid. He smirked as the woman he had accused stood trembling beside her daughter, her head bowed, hands clasped tightly. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, many already assuming the maid was guilty simply because a powerful man had said so. But as soon as the daughter requested to represent her mother, the atmosphere shifted. Her voice was calm, confident, and carried the weight of truth. The judge leaned back in mock amusement and said, "Do you really think you can defend a thief?" But the daughter didn't flinch. She met his gaze and replied softly, "I'm not here to defend a thief, Your Honor. I'm here to defend my mother from a false accusation." The judge laughed, dismissing her as naive. Yet within minutes, the courtroom realized she wasn't there to beg for mercy. She was there to fight for justice. She opened her folder and presented a list of formal requests to the court. CCTV footage of the judge's office corridor, entry logs from the security desk, and signatures of everyone who had entered or exited on the day the watch disappeared. The judge's confidence wavered slightly. He tried to object, saying the evidence was unnecessary, but the daughter calmly pulled out an official warrant. The audience began to murmur. When the footage finally played, silence filled the room. The large screen showed the hallway outside the judge's office. The maid never appeared. Instead, a man in a suit, one of the judge's personal assistants, was seen sneaking inside, glancing around nervously, and then slipping something shiny into his pocket before leaving quickly. The judge's smug expression vanished. His hands tightened on the desk as the daughter spoke clearly, her tone steady, explaining each timestamp in detail. "This," she said, pointing at the screen, "is the real thief. And this is the person my mother was blamed for." The crowd gasped, eyes darting between the daughter and the furious judge. But she wasn't finished. She turned toward the assistant, sitting pale at the back of the courtroom. "Would you like to tell the court who ordered you to hide the watch?" she asked. The assistant lowered his head, trembling. The judge shouted for order, his voice breaking, but the truth was already unraveling. The once mighty man who tried to frame a poor woman now sat powerless before the daughter he had underestimated. Everyone could see it. The balance of power had shifted. The maid's daughter had taken control of the courtroom, and justice had only just begun to unfold. The courtroom was silent as the daughter stepped forward, her hands steady but her heart pounding in her chest. The judge sat with forced composure, his jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously toward the assistant who now avoided his gaze. Everyone in the room could feel the tension thickening with each passing second. The young woman reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small audio recorder, placing it gently on the table. "Before you continue denying the truth, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "there's something everyone should hear." The judge's expression changed instantly, a flicker of panic crossing his face as the sound played. The recording was clear, too clear to be dismissed. His voice filled the room, instructing his assistant to get rid of the maid before anyone starts asking questions. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. The very man who was supposed to uphold justice had been caught ordering the destruction of an innocent woman's life. The judge leapt to his feet, shouting that the recording was inadmissible, but the daughter didn't flinch. She stood tall and quoted the legal code verbatim, her words sharp and precise. "Evidence obtained in a public space," she said firmly, "is considered valid when it directly pertains to an ongoing investigation." The room fell into stunned silence again. The judge, realizing he had no counter, slowly sank back into his chair, defeated. The maid sat trembling, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter dismantle the man who once made her feel so small. The spectators whispered among themselves, lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, and even the court clerks paused in disbelief. The young woman continued with unwavering confidence, presenting additional proof, bank transfers, hidden case files, and testimonies that revealed years of corruption under the judge's command. Each revelation struck harder than the last, and by the time she finished, the once respected figure before her was completely stripped of dignity. The presiding officer of the court looked at the evidence, then at the disgraced judge, and declared that he would be suspended pending a full investigation. The words echoed like a final blow. As officers approached to escort him out, the judge glared at the maid and her daughter, his face red with humiliation. But neither woman looked back with hatred, only quiet strength. The maid reached out and took her daughter's hand, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You've given me my name back." Cameras flashed, and reporters began scribbling furiously, documenting the fall of a man who thought he was untouchable. The daughter turned to the crowd and said softly, "Justice doesn't need power, it needs truth." In that single moment, she had not only cleared her mother's name but also reminded everyone watching that no title, no robe, and no authority was greater than honesty. The courtroom that once belonged to the judge now belonged to justice itself. When the hearing finally ended, the maid sat frozen for a moment, unable to process that the nightmare that had stolen her peace was finally over. Then her daughter turned to her with gentle eyes, and that was all it took. The maid rose to her feet and rushed into her daughter's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. For years she had been invisible, spoken to only through commands and insults, treated like she was nothing more than a shadow in someone else's world. But now she stood at the center of a courtroom, surrounded by applause and admiration. The same people who once looked down on her were now clapping for her courage, for the quiet dignity she had held on to even in her darkest hour. Her daughter held her tightly, whispering that everything was over, that justice had finally been done. The judge who once looked untouchable now sat slumped at the defense table, his face pale, his reputation shattered. The officers led him out in silence, and the room that once echoed with his authority now carried only the sound of his downfall. Outside the courthouse, the media had already gathered, eager to capture the face of the young woman who had brought a corrupt judge to his knees. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, but the daughter spoke with humility. "Never underestimate those who come from small places," she said softly. "My mother taught me that honesty is the foundation of everything. And today, honesty won." Her words spread across news stations, social media, and headlines by evening. People called her a prodigy, a hero, a symbol of hope for the voiceless. But she didn't see herself that way. She saw herself as a daughter who simply refused to let the system destroy the woman who raised her. Back at home, the maid walked through her small house differently that night. For the first time, she didn't feel like a servant to the world. She felt like someone who had survived it. Neighbors came by to congratulate her, bringing flowers and food, whispering how proud they were of her daughter. The maid smiled through tears, saying quietly, "She was born for justice." The next morning, newspapers displayed the story on every front page. Judge suspended after framing innocent maid, defeated by her own daughter. The judge's name became a warning across the legal world, while the maid's daughter received invitations from law firms and universities to speak about integrity and truth. She declined them all, choosing instead to stay by her mother's side for a while, reminding her that their peace was worth more than fame. As the sun set on that week, the mother and daughter stood outside their small home, holding hands and watching the golden light fade into the horizon. The world finally knew what they always did. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the brave. The judge who once tried to frame a maid had unknowingly tested the strength of a legal prodigy and lost everything in the process.